GM, everyone, and welcome to Smart Contact, an interview series with the world's most influential and impactful Web3 leaders. This podcast is produced by Web3 Harbour and is supported by Circle, our 2024 lead sponsor, and by Invest Hong Kong, co-sponsor of the Smart Contact series at Blocktober. Like and subscribe for more Smart Contacts. Welcome to another episode of Smart Contact, produced by Web3 Harbour and powered by our partners, Invest Hong Kong and Circle, our 2024 lead sponsor. I'm Gary Liu, co-founder and CEO of Terminal 3 and chair of Web3 Harbour, and I'm your host today. We're recording with a live audience, and today's Smart Contact is Mathias Imbach, co-founder and group CEO of Sygnum Bank. Thank you so much for joining our conversation.
Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Mathias, you and I last saw each other almost exactly a year ago in the Four Seasons in Hong Kong after a whirlwind Hong Kong FinTech week. At the time, you and your co-founder Gerald were on an aggressive learning journey through Hong Kong, trying to figure out what the opportunities and potentially the challenges are about bringing Sygnum, your business, and growing it in Hong Kong. And now you're back a year later.
To be very frank, I've known, maybe first I should say, I've known and visited Hong Kong many, many years, even prior to Sygnum, and I love the city and continue to love it. So always great to have excuses and business to come back. This year, again, it was the same as last year, was the FinTech Week and all the, all the events around it, which made us come back. Yeah.
Amazing. We're so glad that you guys are back. Now, Sygnum is a true pioneer in digital asset management. You and your three other co-founders started the bank in 2017, is that correct? And this is pre, and you were early 2017, this is pre-ICO summer and a Web3 generation before NFT summer, DeFi summer. The world back then, it's only 7 years ago, but in the Web3 world, that is multiple generations, back then looked very different. Sygnum, after its founding, became the first licensed digital asset bank in both Switzerland and in Singapore, creating this East-West corridor that remains incredibly important to your business. We will get to that later. But I want to ask you first, what was the animating force behind the founding of Sygnum? What was the problem that you and your co-founders were trying to solve for?
Yeah, it goes back to our personal stories before that, and I can't go too deep, but maybe a little bit, because I think it's important. So in case of one of my co-founders who's not here today, Luca Müller, he is a lawyer. He had his own, or continues to have his own law firm. He was the gentleman who came up with the idea to launch Ethereum and then later other protocols in foundation structure in Switzerland, and hence was at the very formational period of the crypto valley as we know it today in Zug and surrounding areas. Manu, the other co-founder, was more the techie, banking and tech know-how, which has been dabbling with Bitcoin before. Gerald, coming from an institutional investment management standpoint and private markets access standpoint, and in my case it was actually driven by my brother initially in 2012 when he started mining Bitcoin.
Wow. So he's not working anymore. That's pretty much what you're saying.
He's working, but just on stuff that he enjoys. Yes, and then when Ethereum came up, I went on a quite libertarian journey, also quite anti-banking. I think it's relevant in the context of the.
Are those two things today allowed in Switzerland? To be libertarian and anti-banking?
Well, I thought so, but then I realized it's a bit challenging. I tried to close my bank accounts actually and live without the bank account. Didn't really work, and given that I had never worked in a bank, I was then, together with my co-founders, ultimately naive enough to have the vision to build a crypto bank, a digital asset bank. And why did we do it? Because we've all had these pasts and been, investing in many ICOs and that libertarian thought of democratizing access to capital, etc. But what became clear was that, and the idea, by the way, was not early 17. It was towards the end of 17 during the FinTech Festival. So we knew the concept of ICOs and what it does, and we just realized that great technology, great potential, but it was often detached from reality, as in the developers, the key teams didn't find bank accounts, they couldn't pay their developers' salaries, and frankly, sometimes it also became clear that some rules that work today or have been established, they would also make sense in this industry. So we said, future as heritage, let's go bold, and our thesis was, if this industry is to truly grow and adoption to kick in, we need to build regulated platforms.
All right, there's so many things, even just from that Genesis story, that we want to dig into, but let's start with Switzerland. Let's start with where Sygnum started. Besides the fact that you guys were already there, the reality was that that was the one place in the world in 2017 that had any kind of crypto policy or regulation. Now, obviously, it was nowhere near as mature as it is today, but there was something already. The context of which, for our audience, is that Bitcoin and crypto in Zurich and Zug go back to 2013. Is that when Bitcoin Swiss started?
Yes, correct.
So at that point was already 4 or 5 years. Again, that's already multiple generations in our world of crypto activity. And of course, then the foundation, your co-founder, creating this concept of launching crypto projects via foundation as a structure, led to even Ethereum being started in Zug. And then from there on out, several other major blockchains that we still build on today that are still incredibly important to our industry being founded as foundations out of Switzerland, in the canton of Zug very specifically, and still having operations there today. Now, explain to us, so when you guys started at the end of 2017 for Sygnum, what was the regulatory environment like in Switzerland?
I mean, it was not the case that the regulatory framework was fully built out. I think the key driver was that there was political support. We had, in Switzerland, we have 7 federal councils, and there was one federal council. He famously went on stage and said, Switzerland wants to be a crypto nation. And this one statement, and repeated also behind closed doors, often enough, has led to a conducive environment, and also gave the regulator the leeway and the guidance to work through a regulatory process such as the one with ourselves. We can proudly say that we are the world's first digital asset bank, but that led us working in 18 and 19 together with the regulators in many workshops where sometimes there would be 10 people during 8 hours, full day workshops, working through the challenges that come with setting up such a new a bank in such a new industry. How do you manage travel rules and compliance, KYC? How do you manage risk management when it comes to collateralized lending with Bitcoin as collateral, etc. So this was really the process. We then got licensed in August 2019, and even only in 2021 we then had also the legal, it's called the DLT law, which came into effect. So I would say when we started, it was really the political will to wanting to be active in this space on the back of what you've mentioned yourself, all this ecosystem that has evolved, the many foundations that have been set up, the talents that have moved to Switzerland. And maybe the last thing I would say is it feels very natural for the Swiss mind and mindset for this to happen there, because a blockchain is decentralized. In Switzerland, we have a direct democracy. We have the subsidiarity principle, federalism, the cantons, right? The 26 cantons, and we try to take decisions at the smallest unit possible and only delegate up when necessary. And so it kind of, I don't think it's a coincidence, right, that it led to political support and that it kind of gels well with our DNA as the Swiss.
Speaking of cantons, funny story, just a couple of months ago, I had the privilege of sitting down with a very, very senior corporate executive from Switzerland. They will remain unnamed in this podcast, but they were talking about Hong Kong to me and really espousing why they love to visit Hong Kong, why they believe that Hong Kong is an incredible place to build a business. And I said, hey, you're one of the very few Western executives who seemingly still has this view today because of everything that has happened in Hong Kong over the course of the last few years, and frankly, the narrative, the driving global narrative. And this Swiss executive looked at me and goes, oh, really? One country, 2 systems seems so easy because I live in one country, 26 systems. And that does not work for enterprise, at least from their point of view. Sorry to interrupt the video, but I want to tell you about our 2024 Smart Contact lead sponsor, Circle.
What is Circle?
At Circle, we're building a digital dollar that brings the power of the internet to
to money.
Circle's the place where crypto meets stability,
where local businesses meet global customers.
and the US dollar meets USDC.
Meet Circle.
We also want to thank our smart contact at Blocktober sponsor, Invest Hong Kong. Thank you to all of our sponsors and community partners. Now back to the conversation. All right, the other jurisdiction that you are licensed in, this east-west corridor that's been created by Sygnum Bank, is of course Singapore. Was it always natural that Sygnum was going to exist first in Switzerland and Singapore?
Yes, very much so. And in fact, we are, as mentioned, 4 co-founders. 2 at the point of the establishment of the firm were actually living in Singapore, myself included. So I, at that point, was based in Singapore. I was managing a family office before that, and so we were operating out of Singapore. And so Gerald and I, we were based in Singapore, and Luca and Mano, the other 2, out of Switzerland. And so the core idea was really to build Sygnum in parallel with a dual headquarters approach, because we felt both the regulatory frameworks, or the openness, at least as I've outlined before, in these jurisdictions is there to build what we wanted to. But then also the credibility associated with the 2, with Switzerland and Singapore, when it comes to financial market and financial market infrastructure, made it conducive. And of course, it helped that we had our professional backgrounds and networks there as well. So it was from the get-go very clear that we would also embark on establishing the business in parallel across the 2. And there's also a lot of intangible benefit from it, including talent, right? If we were just from the beginning, when you only had the slides and nothing really beyond that, we were still already the cool international company, Switzerland and Singapore. So there were many people that also found that element key. The same applies to fundraising. So we have a good mix of European and Asian investors, due to, by the way, also many out of Hong Kong, I must say, by now. So that was very clear that from the beginning.
The 2 things you said that sound very familiar. Number 1, having only slides and a cool idea, nothing else. That's still 90% of our industry, unfortunately. But the second thing is, where you started in Switzerland, you said it was political intent that then led to this private-public discussion, discourse, that through fire, through debate, led to informed policies. And it really does feel like the process that Hong Kong has been going through over the course of the last couple of years. So there is for sure plenty for us here in Hong Kong to learn from your experience. Of the regulations that require those 8-hour-long sessions to debate, multiple of those, I'm sure, to get to some kind of conclusion, what was the biggest challenge? What was the hardest thing for the private sector and the public regulators, as well as government officials, to agree on?
Honestly, there's really many things. I mean, for us, from our vantage point, it was probably just the uncertainty whether this could ever even happen, and combined with the requirement to have a massive governance in place before you even start, plus a massive capital base to be even, be able to launch as a bank, and not knowing what that means on the timeline, as a startup, going back again to the slides and fundraising and not being able to tell investors when the license would come, etc. I think that was kind of holistically, I think, the biggest challenge. And again, I think my personal key advantage was never having worked in a bank before, because otherwise I would never have dared to even start. Knowing what I know now, I would never do this, right? Sort of. And I think that was the biggest challenge, this uncertainty. But then in terms of key requirements, it was probably around the AML processes, the travel rules. How do you do that? How is the risk management? How is basically the traditional rules which applied 100 and continue to apply 100% to ourselves as well? How do we translate these to this new technology? Where does it need tweaks, and how do we implement these? So that would be the key challenge.
All right, the travel rule we have to come back to, but I'm not going to get you to dig into those details just yet. The last question about Sygnum's history I want to ask before we move on to this integration, overall integration of traditional finance and decentralized finance and tokenized assets in particular. The last question I'll ask about the history is, what was the process like tokenizing your company's own equity and then having that traded? Because you guys were amongst the first to do something like that.
Yes, again, I mean, the start was political will and ability to do that in a legal framework that works. And this is when the DLT law in Switzerland, I think it was August 2021, came into effect after the whole legislative process and the parliament voting for it, etc., and then going into implementation, etc. So that really led to a situation where we could, where the rights towards ownership in form of a token is very legal. There's a clear legal basis to defend it in front of court. Is what is needed to be able to trade significant with real money on the spectrum. And so then we just wanted to, given that we have been believing in this in this infrastructure and been investing in it from the very beginning, we wanted to showcase that we can do it and we are also doing it ourselves. And the process as such was actually not so difficult, which is the whole point of this, hopefully simplifying a few things, then also in terms of how you manage the cap table, etc. But what we did not do at the same time, and that is important, we did not become a listed company as a result of that, right? We did not do a tokenized IPO. Sygnum till today remains a privately held company, but the shareholders, whoever is on the Sygnum platform, has the Sygnum shares as part of their portfolio, and this is integrated in their wealth and easy to track also for tax purposes. And whenever there's secondary market share transfers, then these can be done on chain.
Are you able to share what percentage of the company's equity is tokenized in this way?
There's all of it is tokenized, but not all the shareholders would have the tokens in the wallets, right? And I would say it's maybe something like 60% or so that actually have it in their
That's
wallet.
much higher than I would have guessed. I mean, that's incredible. That is the definition of eating your own dog food, literally doing what you philosophically believe in with your own money, with your own company, even with all the inherent risks, I'm sure, that come with that process. Speaking of which, a topic that you are deeply passionate about, which is not a surprise. I mean, you're the group CEO of Sygnum. But a topic you've talked about a lot publicly is why it's so important for traditional finance to understand blockchain and to increasingly integrate with blockchain. Can you tell me why? Why do you think it's so important for traditional finance that by itself today has a bunch of extant problems that traditional finance and the financial system we have today can fix without blockchain technology? Why is it so important that they understand blockchain technology and actively try and move into either the digital asset world or at least deploying blockchain technology as part of the stack?
Yeah, first I would probably say it's very much both ways. I mean, so I also tell my colleagues from the Web3 industry it's equally important for them to think about how TradFi and traditional finance works and to learn from that. So I think this learning goes very much both ways. And sometimes I feel the Web3 crowd has still some trouble doing that, but I think it would benefit them down the line if they did. But to your question, it goes back to just my core belief that this technology will alter the way we transfer what we own, the way we transfer data, the way we also in the future how artificial intelligence will also need a means to transfer value. And it boils down to the core belief that I have that this technology allows to transfer originals, not copies between you and me, without intermediaries, as long as you have access to the internet. And that's a very fundamental thing, which we are still not good at making plausible and kind of making the value seen without people having to actually interact with the blockchain because they don't want to. They want a Web 2 experience, but it's Web 3 machinery behind, right? And there we still have a lot of work to do. But it's a very fundamental thing that will change. It will change how financial market infrastructure is set up. It will change how we settle, how we transfer money cross border, etc. And what traditional finance companies have an issue with often is that many have started to invest in it, but they tend to, particularly also traditional exchanges that I know some, particularly in Switzerland as well, they've invested hundreds of millions in such infrastructure, but they need to be careful that they're not applying the traditional mindset in terms of how a process should be structured, how a settlement flow should look like, which parties have to be involved in such a process, and then try to put that on a blockchain, right? For example, the very definition of a CSD, a central security depository, and a public permissionless process, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't work. It makes no sense. So it's important that they start engaging but not be blindly following what they've done the last 30 years. And then obviously I believe, and we see this with our bank-to-bank partners, we have now more than 20 banks in Switzerland and Europe integrated with our platform. The moment they did it, particularly private banks, suddenly the next generation joins the family heads in their banks or relationship managers meetings. And this is not just me doing marketing, it's a fact. I've been part of these meetings. Suddenly the son, the daughter, the next generation, they come because, hey, now my bank is also offering Bitcoin. And with some banks, we've even done things like NFT education sessions, like a little course about Bitcoin, and at the end you got an NFT as a badge. And so kind of that's kind of it. It's just something they need to deal with.
All right, you've actually brought up a very central tension of developing this technology within regulated space, specifically in regulated finance, which is the reason, the why this technology. And the cynics among us will tell you that the reason why there is growing interest in this technology within the traditional financial world with traditional capital is purely because it's alpha. It's a way to make multiples that traditional fiat or traditional investment products can no longer yield. That's the cynics. And therefore technology and the way that governments and private enterprises are investing in this technology is just as a money-making tool. Then they're the philosophers. And I would like to believe that the majority of people who are actually active in this space are philosophers. I can tell you that it's not true, but I would like to believe that. And the philosophy at the end of the day goes back to what you started with, which is your libertarian streak. Why does digital asset ownership really matter? What does open finance actually look like? How does it make the world better? If you and I and all the people in this room and everyone listening to this podcast can actually own our data, our digital assets, our identity, and then freely be able to transact with all of that. The philosophy in the financial tech side of digital assets is very easy to lose sight of. So I'm going to give you an opportunity here to get back, take your suit jacket off, get back to that libertarian Mathias, and tell us a little bit more, like, why does that matter? Why does the philosophy of self-sovereignty and this dream of true open finance matter to the world? How does it make the world better?
Yeah, I really don't want to disappoint you, but I must also say, after now 7 years, building and managing this company in a very tightly regulated fashion, and all the regulators wherever we are, obviously being all over us, and rightly so. We want that exchange. It is increasingly difficult for me to be the fully libertarian self. So I probably have moved from being a libertarian to a liberal realist, maybe, right? And I believe that it doesn't bite each other. I think that core belief that direct access to what you own, to manage your data consciously, to not, to think about where you put your data, and that at the moment, most of us, we put our data into the hands of a few siren servers that's soaking up all the profits, and there's no network. Those who create the networks are not benefiting from it. So that core belief that those who generate the network effects, the users of a blockchain, are also rewarded with the token value appreciation, because typically the more activity on a platform, on a public permissionless platform, the more value it has it. Or if you help secure the network, you get rewards for it, you get a yield on it, on staking, etc. That is, I think it's a very that's the core of Web3, and it's a very beautiful thought that I dearly believe in, and want to do whatever I can to contribute that it actually happens. But it doesn't have to happen in this dogmatic way that everyone needs to have needs to self-custody the wallet, etc. Because guys, this will not happen. I would say more than 90% of the world population, they don't want to manage their own assets as they don't want in traditional finance today. And quite frankly, many also cannot because they're not interested in managing technology. So I think we need to not give up the Web3 thinking of creating a values layers on top of the Internet of Information and having those benefits that create network effect, but at the same time be realistic that if we want to achieve this, we need to help them with the infrastructure that we know from Web 2 as well, namely that many people will also in the future have their assets with a bank. And that I believe in, and I think this is about 90% of the world population. In other words.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of this world is that the pioneers or the enlightened folks in Web3 and digital assets are the ones who really believe in self-custody. But the people in the real world who believe in self-custody are the Luddites, are the ones who stuff cash into their mattresses and their pillows and actually only keep their assets at home. And so how do we jump from believing that self-custody is because you just don't understand how the real world works to now a world in which self-custody seems to be the way, the enlightened way forward. I think that in general, you and I would agree on this more nuanced version of a decentralized future where we can take advantage of self-sovereignty at the very least, but still exist in somewhat of a real world.
Yes, and quite frankly, if I may, because I see this on who are our clients, and I can tell you there's many that you would see and think they're pure, Bitcoin maxis or so, and they are Sygnum clients, because ultimately there's also needs that they have in terms of transferring in and out, etc. But I don't think it's either or. I'm also happy to out myself. I like both. I like to have my Sygnum account and have a custody wallet. It's easy for taxes and all of this reporting. It's just all done. But I also believe very much in self-custody, and the right mix makes it work.
All right, it's the 7 years since Sygnum's founding. Again, like I mentioned several times, that is dog years in crypto. In those 7 years, if I were to ask you, how would you cut up those 7 years in cycles and phases that you have experienced for digital asset growth, in particular within a regulated world?
Yeah, I mean, if I leave out what happened before 2017, which was also a fun time before that, but then 17, beginning of 18 was the ICO hype, which then went bust. That was when we thought, okay, this is now our time to set up Sygnum.
Wait, after the bust, like the bust was part of the genesis story of Sygnum?
No, I mean we decided to start this project before it busted. So the moment we wanted to start raise money, it busted. so the perfect moment, typically. Yeah. Yes, actually in hindsight, quite proud that we managed with a piece of papers to get that money for that idea at that point in time. But so that was the first phase, and I always say it was great that it happened. I mean, it showed us that in this token economy, in these token economies, it's like you're having immediately IPO'd companies which are 24/7 live. You can trade them, and any news is immediately reflecting in a token value. And then you have bad companies, good companies, many fail. It's like venture capital investments with immediate liquidity. And I always say if Sygnum had been tokenized from the get-go, we would have been a few times down to zero value and a few times probably multiple of a unicorn and anything in between. So that is kind of what sometimes people don't understand, what is different in this world. It's like immediately 24/7 liquid and IPO'd without the governance and sometimes the readiness that is needed to be a solid IPO company.
By the way, you generally see that as good, as net positive?
I mean, I don't want to say that everything that happened around 2017 and 18 was good, but it's probably realistically needed that you have these innovation pushes, these use cases coming up, and then exaggeration, and then moderation and learnings, and then you move on. I think that's exactly what happened. So 18, then this was our building phase. It was the crypto winter. It was a very difficult time. That was our time, though. If I always then reflect what it meant for Sygnum, it was a time when we built. It was a time when we went through these workshops with FINMA, etc. And quite frankly, I'm glad that we didn't do that in 2017, and end of 2017 or 2021 when everything went up to the right. So you then don't want to have these conversations and not being able to do business. So for us, it actually worked out well. So that was about, okay, we had that bust. Second phase is now building solid infrastructure. Everyone realizing, hey, we need some rules, we need regulation. So it actually gave us confirmation for that we were on the right path. Then in 19 we got the license, and I remember the first Ether trade that we did was for $180 or something like that. It also shows you kind of what happened since. And we were very constrained. We had several phases. How they, first we could only onboard 30 clients, friends and family, then audit, then another 50 clients, then audit. We could only do Bitcoin, ETH 9 to 5 Monday, Friday initially. Bounded by the regulators. So we had to go through releasing ourselves over time. Then came the next, the DeFi summer. That's the phase 3, like the next wave of adoption. DeFi summer, then metaverse, NFT. The next phase of then leading to great innovation, but also some exaggeration. That was the first time we could really then start reaping the benefits a bit. But at the same time, it was tough because those around you, around us, they still were largely not regulated and could grow much faster because they had they were not bound back by the rules that we had to abide by. And sometimes I was challenged with questions such as, I get 15% yield on Celsius, why would I bring the money to you, right? These were the questions I would really get every day. And then we know what happened, the scandals, and that's the third phase, I would say, the scandals in 22 and 23. That was really when it hit everyone. Okay, counterparty risk management, regulatory frameworks are needed. Now it makes sense that the assets in the bank like Sygnum are off balance sheets, bankruptcy remote. That was a very difficult time, but at the same time it was actually the ultimate validation of our approach. And since then, nobody has turned back and says, it doesn't make sense that there's more regulatory frameworks, etc. It also woke up regulators across the world,
including here.
Exactly. And then I would say some of the things that were and have been decided since then we're actually only starting to see from next year onwards. So that was the 2022, 2023 scandals, and since then I would say everyone has realized what needs to happen, but I would call it the period of regaining trust, and that regaining trust is not yet done. I think we all have still a lot of work to do because it destroyed a lot of trust, what happened there.
Thank you for bringing up the key term for today's summit. So let's shift to talking about that trust. And I want to start with the policy and regulatory side of this. A lot of advancement in policy and regulation, especially in Switzerland, since you guys first started. Thank you for the hard work that you guys clearly did with FINMA. It's benefited not only your markets, but the entire world. And I know that you guys have customers across the world, but it's benefited us here in Asia. We, of course, refer constantly to what FINMA says and how they're looking at the world to try and figure out or decipher and read the tea leaves about how other regulators around the world are going to perceive these things. But there's still a lot of work to be done on the regulatory side. So before we can get to a point where we actually have blanket trust from traditional finance, or at the very least trust that meets the expectations of the traditional financial world within a decentralized asset world, what other policies and regulations need to come into play? What else are you guys actively working on the policy and regulatory side to help the rest of us out, as you have been for the last 7 years?
Well, the first thing I would say is the regulatory environments in whatever jurisdictions we are operating in is not something that is static. It's changing over time. To also say something critical about Switzerland, because it's been praised by you and me now quite a bit, I would say the political backing that was there when we launched in 2017 is today probably not there anymore. And why is that? Because as you all know, last year we had the Credit Suisse situation, right, which was a huge blow for the Swiss economy and for the financial market. And I would say since then, there's a lot of let's say for the regulators under significant pressure, which is understandable, and I think that will also will have an impact on how one deals with innovative new technologies. So I think that is something which is certainly a worry I have for the next 2 years or so to operate in this environment. You then have other jurisdictions which are now in the phase that maybe Switzerland, to some extent Singapore were a few years back is now, okay, we really want to do this, figuring out the frameworks there and also wanting to attract business. And there I would say there's two sub jurisdictions, two types. You have the types that are focusing a lot on marketing and maybe not so much on the actual implementation, and then you have those who really do it right. And I must say, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in Hong Kong now, I'm very sure now, also after having interacted with regulators and other policymakers here, Hong Kong is in the right camp. So it's embracing it, but also not going too fast. And I know we all want it to go fast. I also want it to go faster, but I think it's done in a mature way, so that it actually protects the what is there already, right? And there's a lot to lose, and so I think we are in this phase. Then we have, if we talk about Europe, we have MiCAR coming up, which is a big deal, going live in January. The stablecoin part already went live. Jeremy was here. I'm sure he talked about it. So that's a big deal. We're also getting ready for this, but I expect that it will be much more painful than people think, because the stuff that was put into law is something around, is dealing with the things that happen in crypto in 2020, right? And since 2020, a lot has happened. What's happening with staking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it will be a continuous process.
Yeah, something that we talk about quite a bit in the community here in Hong Kong is that this asset class is so fundamentally different than all asset classes that came before it. Not because money has necessarily changed, but the way that this asset can be distributed, and more importantly, the way that this asset can be built on top of, right? The composability, the ability to create derivative products, and the magic of those derivative products. That is what makes this asset class so fundamentally different. On top of that, you have an expectation from the people that actually own and operate with this asset class that is completely different than the expectations of traditional finance. Whether it be the anonymity necessary on chain, because we haven't separated the identity layer from the transaction layer yet, whether that's coming, clearly the reason why we're here to have this conversation, or it's because there is just this desperate desire by the people in decentralized finance to remain anonymous, to remain borderless, to really be, I guess, global, or at the very least to be barrierless in their actions, right? This is the part that we find, whether it's traditional enterprise or our friends in government and the regulators and the lawmakers don't understand. And so a lot of these regulations that are being put in place that are informed to some degree still treat the asset as an old school asset, just with slightly different rules, right? You guys must have gone through that debate and that argument in Switzerland and in other jurisdictions that you participated in. Has there ever been a compelling argument that you've made to make the other side understand this asset as a foundationally different thing?
I think it depends with which stakeholders, quite frankly, because if you interact, I'm just being very candid here, if you interact with regulators, they have often, and for good reasons, this same risks, same rules, and technology neutrality in terms of how they apply rules. And so when we interact with regulators, we try to transform or translate what we do into how it corresponds to today, because otherwise it's already such a alien thing for many to start with. If you then already make it sound like this is completely something which is completely different, so you're not moving forward. Having said that, I of course agree that sometimes these fundamental discussions come up, and one has always been and sometimes continues to be is private permission versus, we start
Yeah,
even
of
there,
course.
private permission versus public permission as blockchains. And I've had wonderful conversations with regulators, but also, executives of banks, exchanges, etc. And I think I'm actually quite positive that even today, Benjamin will laugh, I heard the banks, and I heard public permissionless and HSBC in one sentence, which makes me
Excited, I hope.
excited,
Yeah.
exactly. But that was a big discussion. How do you deal with public permissionless networks in a banking environment in a traditional sense? And I think we're there. What is missing is how do you ensure anonymity, in the sense like privacy on chain, which is, by the way, those in DeFi. I'm also active in DeFi. The crowd tends to believe that it's anonymous, but then the moment you interact with your tax authority, which and it's about the public keys, etc. It's actually the most once it's linked to your identity.
Yeah,
it's the most transparent technology that you can have. So in that sense, tax authorities, for example, they love it, or they will love it in the future when they go back 10 years and some people think, oh, who cares what I did in 2020 in DeFi summer? It won't be like that. I always tell my friends. But so we need to solve that. I know, for example, the Swiss National Bank has looked at how can we create a privacy on the blockchain. That is one key topic, and the other one is, of course, identity. And I think their technologies are there to do that. Zero knowledge proofs, and I hope that we move into a world where we can agree on that. This is only possible with public permissionless networks to solve these two elements as well. And I also us, we haven't solved that yet. It needs all of us to do that.
Well, it certainly sounds like you guys are further along than many peers in the region. And there's one specific regulation that I want to ask you about because I don't know if you meant to make it sound like if you'd solve for travel rule, but this is amongst the most frequently discussed headaches in the digital asset world anywhere, and especially in Asia, is compliance with travel rule. Mm-hmm. Effectively, a copy and paste set of guidelines from traditional finance into digital assets that put the onus now on the virtual asset service providers, trading platforms, banks, issuance platforms, and whatnot to transfer customer information in between systems without actual guidance on how to properly secure privacy of that data, without a universal standard of any kind of what that data looks like and how to send it back and forth. And so now we're left with a very, very fragmented marketplace of quote-unquote solutions that are not safe for users, that are incredibly cumbersome for virtual asset trading platforms and other service platforms, on top of which you still have the entire DeFi world saying, we're not going to touch this because this is not anonymous, and therefore the moment I touch this, I dox every wallet that is on network, and suddenly you're forever doxxed, okay? So, have you actually, in Switzerland and with Sygnum Bank, solved travel rule, and if so, how?
I mean, we had from the very first day of our existence as a licensed bank, we had to follow the travel rules. And so there's never been a transaction, a crypto in or outflow where we did not have to follow these rules for and to document, for example, that wherever the assets are sent, that this wallet is fully KYC'd and linked to the identity. And there's different ways how you can do it. There's signed transactions. There's also with certain very stringent ways but it is cumbersome. You can do with screenshots, but you have to be with the person and the passport in front and stuff like that. It is painful. What we have done is we've created, we call it crypto AML tool, an AML tool which is an integrated workflow, and also workflow between the compliance and sales team and the client on fully digital, where this information can be in as seamless as possible way streamlined and shared. And also there's different analysis depending on what wallet type it is, etc. There's different requirements in alignment with FINMA. So in that sense we have solved it, but I don't want to say it's the best. It's not the perfect user experience, right? Because we are going way beyond than sending, in terms of documentation, beyond sending a bank transfer in US dollars, right? That's what sometimes is so interesting also about it, yeah.
I'm going to attempt to make you do something quite hard, which is dream with me for a second. That you're allowed to draft the next version of the FATF travel rule. Okay, which there's an ongoing working groups and consultation going on at FATF for that next version of the travel rule. And what we're hearing, of course, is that it is getting more stringent, not less, and then it's not actually taking into account the realities of the digital asset world. But let's say, dream for a second, that you get to draft it based on everything you know about digital assets and the pain points of your customers and the technology that has to be deployed today to comply by it. Most importantly is that you understand the intent of the travel rule and the jurisdictional laws that come from that travel rule. But you know that there has to be new technologies to solve for that intent. Dream with me. What is that solution? What would you, as a drafter of the new travel rule, say, okay, this is what the travel rule should actually care about, and here's a technology that could solve for it?
I don't think that, and there, I think this is not Web3 specific. The travel rule will be travel rule, and this will have to be implemented. So I could only say a standard that we all internationally agree, a technology standard, which is basically, let's call it from a data standpoint, a SWIFT equivalent, but on-chain, where this necessary data that is globally agreed by FATF, that everyone has to follow, that all the VAS, the VASPs, can converge around a standard. And if that were to happen, it would not be that big of a deal, because what you could still not do is what you refer to with the DeFi crowd. This would still happen. I mean, because you cannot transact without giving away your identity, but that is also part of this is just what it is, right? You cannot, otherwise you don't have access to traditional banking services or the fiat rails, and I think everyone agrees to this by now. But it is just a technical standard that is globally rolled out, because we are, for example, working on proof of concepts there's many in the market, right? We have, for example, a different one in Singapore we're integrating than in Switzerland,
right?
And so I would hope we will agree on a standard, even if it's the second best standard. The fact that we would have a standard would reduce the burden on us in the industry massively. But how to get there? We need people like you to travel around the world and convince everyone around the same standard.
Well, hopefully there's less travel and more technology building. I think the traveling around the world doesn't help as much as spending time and thinking about the technology. And I do hope, by the way, that our two panels that will follow this podcast conversation may give you some new ideas. Now, the last topic I want to touch on is Hong Kong. Again, you're here now, a year later, for Hong Kong FinTech Week. You've traveled this place extensively. What is the future of digital assets in Hong Kong that excites you the most, and why does Sygnum keep coming back?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly had this nice lunch before, and I certainly agree with one statement. With the statement that you cannot ignore Hong Kong if you want to be in Web3, and that obviously also applies to us. So we certainly have plans to start a more meaningful presence in Hong Kong, which for us always means to go through a regulatory process. And I think in the last year, in interactions with and exchanges with the regulators and the local community, we are just about to go to that next step that I can say. We do, however, believe that we want to do it in not the largest leaps, rather in small steps, because our assessment is that when it comes to the regulatory framework which are relevant for us as a digital asset bank, and maybe at some point in the future also to be able to offer banking services here, which is a long way to go from where we are today, that there needs to be maybe an iteration more on the regulatory clarity side here.
Tell me more. And you're one of the most polished and well media trained executives I've met in this space, and just generally a polite human being. I'm going to somehow try and get you to not be either of those two things right now, but when you're saying that there's more evolution and work that can be done on the regulatory side here in the city, what are you talking about specifically?
I mean, one, I start with something very positive, and I mean that generally and genuinely, and then I'll be very clear what I think it would have to be, and that's my personal opinion. So on the positive side, I really am impressed by the openness of the government and the regulators to receive feedback and to engage with the community and to wanting to do that and sending the right signals. honestly not seen it many places, and I think that's for me already the baseline why I believe it will work out. In terms of what now what I believe the key pain points of the local companies, and the same applies to us, is it's just the rules that are currently in place when it comes to custody and trading are quite prohibitive when it comes to commercial viability. And so, for example, we have decided that we don't even want to start with custody and trading and building up a whole new infrastructure here, because we don't see the business case. Be very blunt. So what I think what it needs is, and I think we've heard it today, this is in the making, it needs that consideration. What would also be needed, in my view, is sometimes to just do it similarly than in traditional finance. For example, we have a growing B2B business. Today, we believe we could help many banks here to integrate with our B2B platform, to keep the customers, etc., fully under their control, but to leverage our technology. Today, we're not allowed, because the rules are as such that while our technology powers millions of customers of even state-controlled banks in Switzerland, here this technology cannot be used. In traditional finance, it's very normal that you have global partnerships.
Right.
The current setup here doesn't allow it. It's a pity, because I think we could contribute, and also many others. It's not just about Sygnum. So that would be the second. And then the third one is maybe, it's obviously you have HDMA and SFC, and I feel sometimes the alignment between who does what, and is in this area among the regulators itself is probably another thing where it could become even more clear going forward.
I think those are very, very clear. I think that those have been echoed by others in the industry as well. So I appreciate you being honest on this podcast about those thoughts, especially because you know your business so well, you know how it's grown in other jurisdictions around the world. And I know that you have the intent to grow it here in Hong Kong. So that feedback I definitely appreciate. Last word before we let you go. When we're talking about trust, and you said that we've gone through this period of time where we've lost trust and we're in the process of regaining trust. What are the key steps that we should make as an industry? I'm not talking about government, the regulators. I'm not even talking about the consumer and retail market, but us, those of us that are insiders in the industry that are building the technology and really believe in that philosophy. What should we be doing more of to rebuild this trust?
I think it starts with just the core value of being and staying humble, to always keep both feet on the ground. That's what I tell the team. The Sygnum team knows this. I mean, every week we have a coherence call. I just say we are in an industry which is so volatile. And when I say volatile, not just price action of Bitcoin, I mean just like new technologies, booms, busts, up and downs, to just have to show consistency in the value, in the approach with which values we want to build this industry. And I think humility and thinking long term, wanting to have a real impact with and connect to what we do to the real world, moving the interactions with technology to make it accessible to the public, to make good stories, showcases why it does make sense, and educate. This is the core, as us as people driving this industry. It's far away from the tech talks and from the and obviously from the price action. I think that would be the core, because for many it just feels a bit alien, a bit funny. It's not real. So we need to make it real, and I think that is always linked to people that have both feet on the ground, have a vision, think it through long term. It's about many entrepreneurs wanting to build an institution and not just fly by night and then exit kind of setup. So we need to want to build institutions that stay around for 50, 100 years and start them now.
Yeah, what you guys are doing at Sygnum has been so foundational for the rest of the world who have followed, and we certainly here have taken advantage of all the paving, the pathfinding that you guys have done. So thank you for not only that work for you and the entire Sygnum team, but also for being with us today to have this very honest conversation about something that is so fundamental to the rest of our world as well. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Web3 Harbour Smart Contact at Blocktober series. We'll see you next time.